Hi, class. So today I want to talk to you about a new topic in Python, and that topic is repetition structures. We're going to start off talking about repetition structures with the first of two different kinds of repetition structures. The first is called for loops. So, a repetition structure in general is a way of repeatedly performing the same operation over and over again. The common purpose for using a repetition structure, or put more simply, a loop, would be to help avoid repeated code in your program and also to help avoiding having to copy and paste the same code over and over again. For loops in particular are a kind of loop called a count controlled loop. The reason they're called count controlled loops is because we explicitly define exactly how many times the code inside that loop is going to repeat or execute. So there's a specific count that controls how many times the loop repeats. Each repetition of a loop is called an iteration. So when we write a for loop, we could determine from the get go that this loop has 5 repetitions or 20 repetitions or 20 iterations, is the word you would use. Now, for loops are not an uncommon idea that's exclusive to programming. You probably use for loops in your everyday life. So, for instance, if I were tasking you with making apple pie, the recipe might ask you to take 9 apples, and for each of those apples, peel the apple, cut the apple, and then maybe place it in a bowl. From the beginning of that task, you know exactly how many times you're going to repeat the same tasks, peeling and cutting the apples, from the beginning, because you know that the recipe calls for exactly 9 apples. So there's a count that's controlling how many times this repetition occurs. Another good example would be if you were washing dishes. When you go to your sink, you might see that there are 5 dirty dishes in the sink. So you know that for each of those dishes in the sink, you need to scrub it with soap, you need to rinse it off with water, and place it in a drying rack. And you repeat this list of steps over and over again once for every dish in your sink. And again, you know exactly how many times you're going to have to perform that process of actions of washing and rinsing and placing the dish because you know how many dishes are in the sink. So, for instance, if we took the apple pie example, one of the things that you'll notice in these two examples is that we start off with a collection. So for the apple pie example, we have a collection of 9 apples. Whereas for the dirty dishes example, we start off with a collection of 5 dishes in the sink. This collection and how many items are in the collection help determine how many iterations of the loop there will be. So for the apple pie example, we know that in my collection, I have 9 apples, which means that I'm going to iterate in my loop 9 times. This relationship between a collection and the number of iterations is often talked about using the terms iterates over or traverses. So I would say something like my for loop iterates over my collection of apples, or my for loop traverses my collection of apples. Now, for each apple in my collection, you can see I have my collection of apples over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to select one item from my collection at a time and then perform my tasks on just that single item before moving on to the next one. So I would go and I would grab one apple from my collection and I would perform my operations, so peeling and cutting up the apple. And then that apple is done. And that would be a single iteration of my loop. Then I would start and go through the next item in my collection. So I would grab a new apple, I would peel it, I would cut it, and now that one is done as well. And I continue this process over and over again, selecting one apple from the collection at a time, performing operations on that item, and then moving on to the next. Now, again, because a for loop is a count controlled loop, I know to stop peeling and cutting apples once I have peeled and cut every single apple in my collection. So I know that I'm going to peel and cut an apple 9 times in this case. you'll notice as I'm going through this that there's always one active apple at any point in time. I'm never cutting or peeling more than one apple at a time. It's only one item, do that item to its completion, and move on to the next. If I was going to write this in Python code, the structure would look something like this. So the syntax for this for a for loop uses the keyword for and a new keyword called in. So we start off our for loop by saying the word for, and then the next item we give is a variable name. And that variable is going to represent the active item at that time. So the item or the apple that I'm currently peeling and cutting. Then we use the keyword in, and then we follow that with our collection of items. So my basket of apples, let's say. Then we end off the header with a colon, and then indented in on the next line is where we put all of the code that should occur with each iteration of the loop. So for our apple example, I might have a for loop that looks something like this. So for, and then I might call my active apple just the word apple. Then I have the keyword in, and then that's followed by my collection of apples. So for an apple in my collection of apples, then a colon, and then indented on the next line is where I put what I should do with each apple. In this case, peeling the apple and cutting the apple. A couple of things you'll note about the choices I've made in this code is that that variable that comes after the word for, I chose to make that variable singular. So I chose apple instead of apples. The reason I chose a singular noun in this case is because I'm only going to be referring to one apple at a time. Yes, that apple changes. I go from apple number 1 to apple number 2 to apple number 3, etc. But that variable is only ever referring to a single apple at any given time. So that's why I chose a singular noun. Now, you'll see also inside of the for loop where I'm peeling and cutting the apple, I'm utilizing that variable name inside of the for loop. So I'm not just peeling and cutting, I'm peeling the apple and cutting the apple. So I'm utilizing that apple in my operations. Um, a more programming example might be to show you a for loop with a collection of numbers, let's say. So an example of a collection or a sequence in Python would be a list. So a list can store multiple values, and in this case, I've decided to store multiple integers in my list. So in my example here, I have a list that contains the integers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And my goal in this program is to iterate over this list of numbers or traverse this list of numbers and do something with each one. So let's see how this would look. So in my first iteration of my loop, I'm going to select the first item in my list. In this case, it's the integer number 1. So I'm going to select the number 1, and that's my active number during this iteration. So in this iteration, the variable I have in my for loop that follows the word for, which I called num, that variable is equal to 1. So then I'm going to go inside of my for loop. I'm on line 2 now. On line 2, I'm going to print out that number plus 10. So I'm going to add 10 to that number and then print it out. And now I've finished my first iteration of this loop. And I can move on to the next one. So in the next iteration of this loop, I'm going to select the integer 2, and I'm going to perform the same operations while num equals 2. So I'm going to print out 2 plus 10, which is 12, print it out, and now my second iteration is complete. But there are still more numbers in my list, so I'm going to move on to the next one, which is number 3. And now num in this iteration equals 3. And I'm going to print out 3 plus 10. So I print out 13 in this case. And again, I have more numbers left in my list, so I'm going to move on to the next, which is 4. And in this iteration, num equals 4. And I'm going to do the same operation. I'm going to print out my number 4 plus 10. So I'm going to print out 14. And now this is where my for loop ends. Again, as we said before, a for loop is a count controlled loop. In this case, the count is how many numbers are in my list. And in this case, there were 4, and we've gone through all 4 numbers in my list. And so this is the final output of this program, 11, 12, 13, and 14, where we've gone through every number on the list and printed it out plus 10. So this is the basic idea of a for loop in Python. You can use for loops with all kinds of different collections. It doesn't just have to be lists. Probably the next topic we would talk about is using a range function to get a sequence of numbers to use as our collection, and we can move on from there. Thank you.